captions are turned on and active for anyone who would like to utilize that service. That button is at the bottom of your screen if you need to click it on. And last, we ask that if you have any questions throughout the course of the webinar, please put them in the Q&A feature. And that way, when Emily is done with her presentation, we'll be able to hit all of the questions and try to get all the answers out for everybody to learn together. So without further ado, it is really my pleasure to welcome my very dear friend and my partner in advocacy, Emily Ruddick, and her team from MASSCreative. Emily, it's all you.
Thanks so much, Beth Ann. This is such a warm and friendly room to be in. Hello all, thank you so much for having me. I'm Emily, as Beth Ann mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of MASSCreative. We're a statewide arts and cultural advocacy group. And so we're gonna just dive right in. I'm gonna share some slides to get us going, but I'm gonna start with a question and feel free to use the chat so that we can answer them. So, what is advocacy? No ideas? Feel free to use the chat. You can enter in what your thoughts are, what advocacy is. Making your voice heard on a specific need or want, a form of activism that requires input from the community. Great answers. That is totally true. To speak up or to voice opinion for oneself or others. I love it. I love it. And at MASSCreative, we like to get real simple. So we believe that advocacy is asking for what you need, right? And the best kind of advocacy is when we're asking for what we all need, right? Because we know that there is power in united asks and messaging. And so at MASSCreative, we want to make things as simple and as like straightforward as possible so that you feel confident in asking for what you need as individual artists and creatives, as parts of cultural communities, as part of your own networking community, right? So we're going to start just by talking a little bit about how, you know, we're talking about this whole space and what are the different roles we all play. The role of the advocate, you, right? So you are the expert. I lead an arts and cultural advocacy organization. Beth Ann and Christian and Michael Bobbitt. Michael Bobbitt heads the State Arts Agency. And so we have some good knowledge, but you are the people in every elected official's district who know what's happening and know the experience of being an artist and a creative in Massachusetts. And your insight and your voice is so important in this process because you are who elected officials want to hear from the most. So here are some ways that you can think about being an expert, right? So the first one is that you have the ability to share good news stories, right? When our elected officials are out in community, they are always looking for things that are happening that are good, right? That are successful, that people in their district are proud of, whether they are, you know, a local city councilor or a select board member, all the way up to the governor. They want to know what people in Massachusetts are celebrating, right? And so you can share those good news stories. You can alert them to issues in your community. You know, as I said, you know exactly what is happening in your community and on the ground level, and you are the one who is the most trusted messenger because you are a constituent, right? And then you can provide solutions, you know, and I think we've all experienced this when somebody kind of comes to us and says, this doesn't work and this doesn't work and this isn't successful. That can really drag you down. But the thing that can actually lift up an issue is when you say, this isn't working and I have an idea about how to solve it, right? So again, you can be the expert who can provide that solution. And then finally, when you do all those things, you share the good news stories, you alert them to issues that are happening in your community, and you provide them with solutions and actions they can take to address them, you become a trusted source of information. And in fact, in some cases, we have elected officials who proactively reach out to advocates in the creative sector to say, what's happening here? I want to understand better the issue. Tell me what it means that the Trump administration has just announced the elimination of the National Endowment for the Arts. How's that going to to affect you, an artist in my community, right? So that's what we're trying to get here. And that's what the role of the advocate is to become a trusted source. So we're going to take, and then the other piece here that I just want to like flag is that regardless of where you are on your advocacy journey, if you are brand new to it and you feel like my voice, it doesn't count, no one listens to me, the process is really confusing and scary and silly, and I don't see change happening. Those are all real things that people feel. You could also be someone who is, I know how to advocate. I've been saying the same things and I'm starting to feel like nobody's listening. That's another real feeling. Or you could say, I've become really close with my elected officials and their staff, and I've been able to build a really strong relationship that makes sure that the things that our creative community needs, they hear about, right? But that one of those pieces here is about consistent advocacy, right? You have an opportunity on the 19th to be in the State House, to be where laws are being made and where our elected officials spend their time and do their business. And so that's an easy opportunity for you to engage, right? But what I also want to encourage you to think about throughout this webinar is, what does consistent advocacy look like, right? If this is your first time going to the State House, awesome. You are going to be with so many friends, right? If this is your 30th time going to the State House, you're one of those friends that's going to help folks along. And then what are we going to do after the State House visit, after we've met with our elected officials, that keeps our issues top of mind? And that matters because first, the more that an elected official or decision maker hears about an issue, the more they take it seriously, right? And the more they hear about it from a multitude of voices, the more they understand that this isn't a niche issue, this is a community-wide issue, right? As I said, this also lifts up priority things, right? If you've built a consistent relationship and you're talking about the good news stories that are happening, you're sharing the impact that arts and culture have in that elected officials district. You also have the opportunity when something comes up that you need them to prioritize. They already know you, you've already built that relationship, and that can lift it up faster, right? We also know that every day our elected officials are making decisions, right? Big ones, small ones. They have the opportunity to weigh in on pieces of legislation and policy. And we want our issues and our value to the Commonwealth to be top of mind for those decision makers every day, not just one day, right? And then finally, consistent advocacy builds community, right? It can feel really lonely if you're just sending an email once a year to your elected official. But when you're engaged in broader conversations with your network around what to talk about with your elected officials, you can continue to strengthen your community bonds, right? So many good reasons why consistent advocacy matters. So I want to take just a minute to kind of like do a quick sketch of our state government, right? Because, like you remember back to a Schoolhouse Rock, right? Like how a bill becomes a law. I'm just a bill. Like there's a big process that goes in, and there are lots of people who weigh in. So in Massachusetts, right, we have 3 branches of government. That's how our Constitution is set up. We have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, and then we have the judicial branch. I'm going to focus right now on the executive and the legislative for just a second. So first of all, we have a slate of statewide constitutional officers. The ones that you probably know the best and are top of mind are Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, right? And through their work, right, as leading the Commonwealth and their administration, they are overseeing all the state executive administration agencies. That's the secretaries of environmental protection, the Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development, Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Economic Development. These are core areas where the Healy Driscoll administration wants to have significant focus and is running programs, agencies, and policy that address those areas, right? We also have an attorney general, right? She is the chief law enforcement officer of Massachusetts. She is the people's lawyer. So right now we're seeing a lot coming out of our attorney general's office where they are filing lawsuits to address potential harm that's being done down in Washington to Massachusetts residents, right? We also have a treasurer, right? The treasurer is collecting the money. Treasurer Goldberg is the person who is collecting the money, monitoring the money, and then doling it out. We have a secretary of state, Secretary Galvin, who is in charge of elections. So if you go to his website, there is a wonderful cornucopia of information about how to vote, where to vote, when to vote, why you should vote. Really great stuff. He also makes sure that that all of the lobbyists in Massachusetts are registered and are doing their jobs and are paying attention to the rules. He also does a number of things related to business filings. So that's his realm of work. And then there's the state auditor, and the state auditor is to make sure that our tax dollars are well spent and the business of government is moving along efficiently, right? So those are our state constitutional officers, and some more than others play a role in the issues of the arts and cultural community. The next branch, right, is the legislative branch, and we have our state legislature, right? So in Massachusetts, we have a House and we have a Senate. We have 160 House members and we have 40 Senate members, right? There are and as you can see from this slide, House districts are smaller than Senate districts. And often, Senate districts overlap House districts, right? So you get represented twice in both chambers of the legislature. And the legislature's job is to create spending bills, right, to decide how tax revenue and the people's money is going to be spent on public goods and services in Massachusetts, to evaluate and pass bills that are for the good of the Commonwealth, and to represent the needs and interests of their communities, right? And so that's where a lot of the work that MASSCreative does, we spend time with our state legislators. And we are really lucky in Massachusetts that we have a committee, a legislative committee, because just like the executive branch, the legislative branch has committees that focus on specific topics, sectors, and issues in the Commonwealth. So in Massachusetts, we have a committee on tourism, arts, and cultural development. I want to flag here that not every state has an actual standing committee that reviews bills and policies that address the needs of the creative sector and act in some ways as champions for the needs and the issues of the creative sector. That's a really important thing. And right now our chairs on the House side is Chair Garbely, and on the Senate side is Chair Mark. Chair Mark was the chair last session as well, and he represents the Berkshires, and is an avid champion for arts and culture, because he's seen how the arts and culture has supported the Berkshire County, right? Chair Garbely, he just started this term, is a fantastic champion of arts and culture in his district, which includes Arlington and parts of Medford. And both are incredible partners that you should get to know, and you will probably see at the State House for this celebration. So, as I mentioned, here are the rules and responsibilities of the legislature. So, you know what your role is, you know what our elected officials' role is on the state level. So let's talk about what you can do. And the most important part of advocacy is you are building a relationship. So we want to make this, as easy as possible. So I'm going to drop in the chat, one second, a little link where you can look up your elected officials, and it'll give you your federal elected officials, your statewide, and your legislative elected officials. It doesn't go down to the city level. Well, I encourage you to check that out as well. There are a couple of other resources we can share out later to do that. But the first thing I'm going to suggest is, when you're looking to build a relationship, is you got to know who's representing you. And I would encourage you to do two things. Sign up for their newsletters and follow them on social media, right? Like, those are like really low threshold ways you can start to understand who your elected officials are, what they're working on, and what they care about, right? Then I would suggest you introduce yourself, right? You can write them a note. There's that form will allow you to grab an email, and you can email them and say, hey, I'm a constituent of yours. And then I would also encourage you to meet with them. And so let's go through those steps really quickly. So first, introduce yourself. Send that note. Tell them that you're a constituent, and mention that you are a member of the creative sector, right? That you're an artist, you're an artisan, you're a creative worker, an arts administrator. Share a little bit about your work, right? Like, what's happening? How are you doing that work in their district? Thank them for serving on the legislature, and then encourage them to support arts and culture in Massachusetts, right? So just like as we're building any relationship, you want to tell them a little bit about yourself, and you want to sort of like get to start to know them, right? Then we encourage you to think about making a meeting. And so on the 19th, this is potentially a really great opportunity, right? So I would encourage you right now to write down in your task list, notebook, or however your Asana, however you track your to-dos, is to say, I'm going to look up my elected officials. I'm going to send them a note introducing myself and letting them know I will be in the State House on the 19th for a celebration of individual grant recipients from the Mass Cultural Council. You could invite them to join the event, right? The Mass Cultural Council is already letting them know it's happening, but when a constituent says, this is happening and I'd really like you to come, it makes all the difference. The next thing I would encourage you to do is say, I would really like to see if following the event, I could schedule a meeting to talk with you more, right? So you can do that in that, so, and why are meetings so important, right? They build relationships, right? There is so much that happens when there's a one-to-one or a face-to-face conversation. The fact that you have taken time out of your day to meet with them in their offices signals your passion for an issue and your willingness to get engaged. And meetings can often allow you to address immediate needs, right? Like, our elected officials are both there to do the big work of government, but are also in the business of constituent services. So they want to know what's happening and how they can help, right? So these are why meetings are essential. So so we can write this down. You've emailed them, you're asking them for a meeting, then you're going to call, right? We're all busy. Our inboxes are always full. So making a call and asking for that meeting is really important. Something that you might happen is that your elected official may say, I'm not available, but my legislative aide, my director of constituent services, my legislative director is available and would very much like to meet with you. And when I first started working in advocacy, I would get those responses and I'd get kind of bummed, right? Because like we all want to meet with like the elected official. And what I've come to understand through my work is that oftentimes the staff are even more crucial to build a relationship with than your elected official. And I'll tell you why. Those staff members are your elected officials' most trusted advisors. On the House side, most members who aren't committee chairs or aren't in leadership have just one staff member or maybe two, and they've got somebody in the district and then they've got somebody in the State House with them. That legislative aide or legislative director, they all have different titles, who's sitting in that building is the person the elected official turns to when they say, I need to take a vote on this. I need you to tell me all the feedback you've gotten from our constituents. I need you to tell me all the research that you've put together to understand this issue, right? So having a direct relationship with staff is so crucial in making sure that your elected official is informed on the issue and that your issues are top of mind, okay? So you can, when you ask them for a meeting, you can say, depending on if you've had a meeting with them before, you can say, I just want to update you on what's happening. Or you can say, I want to introduce myself as a constituent, right? And then after you've made that call, and if you haven't heard back, follow up with one more email, right? We are all busy, but there's no, but we can do, that's 3 touch points. And that feels like a pretty good job as an advocate, right? So then you're going to want to prepare. So you're going to want to know who you're meeting with, right? So this goes back to looking up your elected official, understanding, following them on social media, checking out their web pages. We have an amazing state legislative website that is chock full of information. And depending on your level of sort of like policy nerdiness, surprise, mine is pretty high, you can look on your legislator's page and you can see all the bills that he or she has filed for this session, right? You will also get a little quick bio about them. You'll get to see what their district, the cities and towns that are made up of their district, right? So take a look and do a little bit of research. See what the bills they're filing, right? If they're filing a lot of legislation on a particular topic, that's an important thing to know. That's either a top priority for the legislator or it's a top priority for the district. And understanding that those are the top priorities are going to help you in your conversation with them. Then you're going to want to create a meeting agenda for yourself, right? I always like to go in with a plan. I don't want to just have, a monologue. I want to think about what are the questions I want to ask them, what is the information I'm hoping to gain from them. And then I would heartily encourage you to look up their office location. You can find that on the malegislative.gov website as well. The State House is a beautiful old building and is a notorious maze. So knowing the office number is going to make you feel a lot more confident when you go to get that meeting. So let's talk really quickly about creating an agenda. Here are some questions, or here's how you might think about it, right? You want to introduce yourself. Who are you? You are an artist who's living in their district. How long have you lived there? What is your work? How have you seen that work, in your community, benefit the community? Why are you here today? If you're able to get a meeting on the 19th, this is a great opportunity to remind them that they made the funding possible that made your grant possible. So you want to thank them for the grant that you received, right? Share a little bit about their work. Share a little bit about how the arts and culture are impacting their district. And we have on our website a number of resources and guides that tell the economic impact of arts and culture across the Commonwealth. But hearing direct and specific stories from you, the constituent, about what's happening in their district. You participated in an outdoor arts festival and you were able to sell your work to more people in the community, but you also saw how that arts festival brought neighbors together who hadn't seen each other in a while, how it made it so that people were going into neighborhood restaurants and eating a meal after they participated in the festival, right? Those stories, those on the ground stories really matter. Those are those good news stories. Then I would suggest you ask them some questions. Ask them about their connection to the arts. I both love and my favorite question to love and hate is anytime I'm in a space and I talk that I'm an arts advocate, inevitably the first thing someone will say is, oh, well, I don't have an artistic bone in my body. And I think it's so interesting, right? Like if I say like, I really love Celtics and basketball, nobody responds with, oh, I don't know how to play basketball and I'm a horrible basketball player. They usually say like, I'm a big fan of the Celtics too, or no, I'm not, go Cats, right? So what we want to do is we want to say like, hey, how has arts and culture affected your life? Like, do you have anyone in your family who's an artist? Are you an artist? What you'll notice when you walk into all of those legislative offices is their walls are filled with art, and most likely art made by folks in the district. So that's another conversation starter, right? But you want to get a sense of what their orientation is to arts and culture. My favorite is we had a meeting with Chair Rodricks, who is the Senate Chair for Ways and Means, and he talked about how much his daughter and his wife love to go see shows down on the South Coast, right? They go see plays together, and that's like an activity that they really love to do. And I sort of watched his face light up when he was talking about two people he loved who participated in an arts experience and how much benefit it brought them, right? So those are great things to hear about, right? You might also want to alert them to any actions they can take. And we can talk in a second about things you can ask them for, all right? This might be a thing to say like, hey, this is happening in our community. We're noticing that a lot of artists can't afford to stay because workspace is disappearing. Or, there's some amazing places in your district that aren't accessible to the deaf and disability community. And they're not able to fully benefit from participating in arts and culture, right? So you want to let them know a little bit about them. You can direct them to some actions they can take, and then you want to thank them, right? So that's how you can think through an agenda. And you can populate it however you want, but these are just some sample ways to go through it. Following your meeting, you want to celebrate and you want to follow up, right? You just had like a good experience. As the meeting wraps up, I really strongly encourage you to take a photo with your legislator or with their staff member and then post it on social media, and be sure to tag your legislator and say, I had a great meeting with Representative Dom. We talked about how important arts and culture are to her district in Amherst and how it's shifted the way people understand their communities. It has an economic benefit. You can go on and on, but you can say, it's really great to have an arts champion represent me, right? That is a great way for you to also make another touch point with your elected official. And then my mother raised me as a woman who loves to write a handwritten thank you note. So I encourage you to think about that. If you don't have the time, an email can always suffice. And you can use that email to thank them again, reiterate what what you talked about in that meeting, and then remind them of their asks. And either if they asked a question that you said, I don't know the answer to this right now, but I'll get you the answer, you can follow up there. Or if there's something related to your ask, like, hey, this is a fact sheet about this piece of legislation I'd like you to support, you can attach it, right? And so then they have it and their staff have it. Okay, so there are so many asks you can make to your elected officials. And if we go back just a minute and talk about the realms of responsibility and influence that our elected officials have, when we're talking about our state legislature, they are largely in the business of setting the spending budgets for our state, our statewide budget. And then they are also evaluating and passing bills, right, that have been filed. So those are sort of like the two top things that you can talk to them about. So this year, I just want to flag that we are as Beth Ann mentioned, we are in the middle of the development of the fiscal year 26 state budget. The House has already passed their version, but at MASSCreative, we are still encouraging the Senate to consider a $28 million budget for the Mass Cultural Council and a $17 million budget for the Mass Tourism Trust Fund, right? Mass Tourism Trust Fund supports our regional tourism, our regional tourism councils and our Office of Tourism and Travel, which markets largely cultural assets to visitors to Massachusetts, right? So that's why MASSCreative is suggesting you ask about these two budget lines. MASSCreative also worked, we held a series of meetings last year across the Commonwealth. We held about 11 regional meetings where we asked folks within the creative sector, what's stopping you from doing your work? And what are some good things that are happening in the Commonwealth that you'd like to see scaled up and supported by state investments or state policy? And so from there, we created the Creative Sector Legislative Agenda, which are 3 bills that address specific needs in our community. The loss of creative workspace, increasing the amount of investment in public art across the Commonwealth and making sure that public art is relevant to our local communities, and then increasing accessibility for the deaf and disability community in cultural nonprofits and creative small businesses. So those are some asks you can make, but you don't have to limit yourself to those, right? You can if there's another piece of policy that you're particularly passionate about, a bill that you saw when you looked up on the malegislative.gov that you feel like you really want to talk to your legislator about, you can absolutely do that. But here are some that you can consider. So that's your meeting. That's how you can think about it. Some asks you can make. I talked before about sustained, consistent advocacy. And so I want to just like drop this into your to-do list, right? And I know we all have really long to-do lists and that can feel daunting, but I'm suggesting you think about scheduling yourself 4 advocacy moments a year. So you can make it a quarterly commitment, right? You can set those reminders on your calendar. And you can say, I'm going to commit myself that 4 times a year, I'm going to connect or communicate with my elected official, a minimum, right? If you're really excited about it, go for it, do more. But some of the ways you can do that, you can continue to email them and let them know what's happening in your district or if there are actions you need them to take. You can look out for in-person opportunities, right? Or make in-person opportunities. Every elected official, and they've started to announce them, will hold office hours or coffee hours in their district. These are free. They are not fundraisers. There should be no sort of like entry fee to have a conversation with your legislator. And what they want to do is they want to hear from their constituents. You would be surprised, at how few people show up for those. And because there are so few people who show up, how seriously they take it when you do, right? And if you're following them on social media or you've signed up for their email list, you're going to find out when those office hours are happening and you can attend. You could also invite them to an event. Your art is being included in a gallery showing. You have a performance that's coming up. You can let them know this is happening and invite them to join. And you can share your priorities, your advocacy priorities, and you can also share some of those good news stories. Okay. So in closing, MASSCreative is a resource for you, right? Our whole goal here is to make you feel as confident and successful in your advocacy journey as possible. And so on our website, we have guides and fact sheets. We also have a monthly Artivist town hall where we are really focused on priority policy issues, connecting you with other sectors like labor and unions, making sure you have access to things like open enrollment on the Health Connector, right? So we hope you'll join us for one of those. We also hold local convenings and meetings, and on June 6th, we're going to hold a statewide creative sector summit. So this is open for everyone in the creative sector, and the theme this year is about meeting the moment, how we can advocate to protect and keep our communities strong. So I'm going to drop some of these resources in the chat, and that is all I've got for my presentation. I'd love to open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Emily. So as a reminder, folks, please use the Q&A to put in the questions, and we have a few, so I'm going to read them off, Em, and you can knock them out one at a time, okay?
Sure. Can I just flag here that
Yes.
so I mentioned, right, that like legislative staff are some of the most valuable and important people in my life. I met Beth Ann when she was the chief of staff for Senator Downing and then Senator Hines. And so I hope, Beth Ann, you will take your license as somebody who is so knowledgeable in the building to help me answer these questions, because you're going to get an inside and outside perspective between the two of us.
Me too. Thank you. All right, folks, I'm just going to take them right in order that they came in. The first one came from our friend John. John wants to know, Emily, do you think that we should prepare any presentation? And if so, what medium?
So I think you will, I would go so lo-fi here, right? So I would say no to like a formal presentation. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, God love our building and our state house, but some of these offices are not set up to allow you to do a whole like PowerPoint presentation. You could bring sort of printouts if you want to bring printouts of either your material or fact sheets. They're called leave behinds, are so crucial. They're so helpful. Most likely that's going to go into an office file. That is the resource that the staff use when they want to make sure that they understand an issue. So do that. That's a great idea. But I don't think you need to, don't overcomplicate it, right? Like you want to just you want to be a constituent meeting with their elected official.
And I would just add, if you have a business card, maybe drop that with the person that you're meeting with so that they have your name, your email, things like that. And a lot of the offices, not all, but a lot of them have a clipboard right at the front desk where they ask you to sign in. And that's because they like to keep track of who's coming in and out, because there could be different staff people, or the legislator might be in or out. And a lot of times they will then, like at certain points of the month, they'll be like, oh, wow, we had these 20 people come in unexpected. That's so great. Let's get back to them with a letter or an email. So not all offices do that, but a lot of them do. And that's a nice way to keep that connection going. Okay, second question. I think the things that I'm best at is building community and consistency, but I'm not a huge advocate. How can I better engage with the community to know what to speak up about? Is there a forum or a place I can go that communicates about policies that are being put into place?
Yeah, so I think the fact that you've attended this is one really great resource, the Mass Cultural Council. On MASSCreative's website, we actually do have both MASSCreative's policy priorities that were developed through community conversations, and then we have the legislative agenda. I can drop both of those in, so that's a place to start. And then I would also just flag that oftentimes folks are like, I'm not a very good advocate. And I just want to like remind you that you don't have to be the most knowledgeable person on a bill or the legislative process. That's not what our elected officials expect of you. As a constituent, they expect you to be an expert on your lived experience. And that level of advocacy is such a game changer for our sector and for the policies that we're working on.
As a former staff person, I'll tell you, it's the personal connection and the personal stories. They will remember that personal insight that you share, and they will probably use it in future meetings and even in debates. They will reference it. So those are the things that people stick, right? Because it's personal. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Here's a good one. Emily, how long do you think our elected officials would have to meet with us so that I know how to prepare?
These are not going to be long meetings. I would say I always plan for like maybe 10 minutes, right? Unless you really get into it and get a good groove going. But less is more in this situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I understand, Emily, bringing a list of asks, but is there anything that we should offer the legislators that's beneficial for them? I feel uncomfortable making an ask without offering to a helping hand.
Totally, totally. So again, I'm going to remind you that you sharing your experience of being an artist living in the district is probably the most valuable thing you can offer. And so that offer of like, I want to tell you what's happening in your district is really important. Now, granted, if you come in and say, I want to tell you what's happening in your district, and you proceed to itemize through a laundry list of like horrifying things, and let's be real, not everything is great right now, but I would sort of encourage you to tell those good news stories, right? But not shy away from like, these are the challenges. You know, one of the things we work with a lot of arts, with a lot of regional arts leaders, and we'll hold legislative roundtables where we bring together a group of arts leaders and the legislative delegation. So the senator and all the all the representatives that fall under that Senate district. And the way that we set up those meetings is each person goes around and says, here's the good things we're doing in your district, right? Like, here's the program, the after school music program that we're running. Here's the, I'm an individual artist, and here's what I'm seeing happening thanks to increased funding for arts and culture in my district, right? And then we have them go around and say like, but here's something that's not really working, right? And here's my solution about how I think you could fix that, right? So those are actually the things that our legislators want to hear, right? That's the helping hand.
Great. Okay. I think we talked about this, but it's good to repeat. Are there senior legislators specific to the arts currently serving? As in, are there any folks who are artists themselves in the House or Senate? Or are there committee chairs or members with a policy agenda specific to the arts in Massachusetts?
Awesome. That's a great question. Okay, so
Thank you, Frederick.
First of all, I feel like I'm falling down on my job because, right, like I should have memorized every single member of the legislature that has like a direct connection to arts and culture. Here's what I can tell you right now. Representative Cruz, his brother is a practicing artist, and he talks about the experience of having an artist in his family all the time. Representative Mary Keith is a very proud graduate of Mass College of Art and Design and is a printmaker and is part of a coalition of artists in Worcester who work in the studio space. There are more, but those are the two that come to mind. That is a great question to ask your elected official, and an even better question to email me the answer to after your meeting, right? Like, I don't know, we don't know everything about all of our legislators as much as we try, and oftentimes you all are some of our best allies in figuring that information out. There is a committee, as I mentioned before, there is a committee, a joint committee that is made up of both House and Senate members, and they are charged with reviewing and evaluating all legislation that is related to tourism, arts, and cultural development. Here is that, I just put a link. Here's that committee's page. You'll notice there are 2 chairs, there are 2 vice chairs, and there are members. This is a great thing to do. When you're looking up your elected official, you can also go on the malegislature.gov. You can look up their profile, and it's going to tell you what committees they sit on. If they are on the Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development Committee, that is so great because they're already thinking about the needs of the arts and cultural sector, and you have just become a really trusted source for them to understand the issues better.
Exactly. I think this is a really nice point that our colleague Dan Blask from our Artisan Youth Program has pointed out. So it's less of a question, but I think it's worth raising and amplifying. So thank you, Dan, for being with us today. But Dan points out that he would really love to emphasize Emily's earlier point that it's great to mention to your elected official that you received a grant from Mass Cultural and thanking them for that support of the cultural sector. We get the feeling that so much of what they hear from constituents are requests and complaints. So gratitude seems to be really welcome. I thought that was a really nice point. So thank you, Dan.
So I spend a fair amount of time, right, facing, like we all do, facing the question, like, why should tax dollars pay for arts and culture? Why does arts and culture matter, right? And there I could give you a lot of answers. I could give you very eloquent economic based ones. I could give you community care ones. But what I would say, and this is in response to Dan's point, reiterating my point, is that oftentimes we think that dollars that are public dollars that are supporting the arts aren't meeting our communities, right? It's going somewhere else. It's, oh, Boston gets all the money, or, oh, the Cape and the Berkshires get all the money. And what I'm really proud of is to live in a state where our state arts agency, the Mass Cultural Council, does a phenomenal job of making sure that every region of the Commonwealth is supported with public dollars for arts and culture. And so you closing that loop for those elected officials, letting them know that those state dollars that they voted to make sure go to the Mass Cultural Council are actually making their way to their district is such a crucial part of this long sustained advocacy to increase the amount of money of public investment in arts and culture.
It's so true. Matter of fact, every year, right around in May, June, we publish a list of all of the grants made in every legislative district, and we make sure to hand deliver that to every rep and every senator. And as a former staffer, I can tell you I used to love to receive that package because it was a number of constituent letters that we could put together. It was events, it was press releases, it was web content, it was social media content. So we used to love to receive that. And, we're the only state agency that reports it in that way. So it shows transparency and it shows direct, we made this decision, here's what happened with it. And the House and Senate members love it. And that is on Mass Cultural's website, the funding list under the About Us tab. And we will be putting those out again at the end of our grant making for this fiscal year in June. We have a couple more questions in a few more minutes. So Emily, I'm going to try to get through them. For those of us who have access to a larger community or has a communication network, how can we effectively communicate our advocacy to them? Are there resources that are publicly available that we can share with our networks?
That's a great question. So the first one is that I think, right, like advocacy and engaging with elected officials and with civic engagement in general, there's a lot of reasons why, very good reasons why it feels exclusive, right? And so the more you can talk to your networks and your colleagues and your communities about how you participated, how sure it was scary at first, but now it feels second nature, you invite somebody to join you in some of the advocacy that you're doing, the more we build out a movement of folks who are engaging in this work. So that's the first thing. So I would say is, like, much like you are an expert to your elected official, you can be an advocacy partner and ally to your communities and your networks, right? The other thing I would say is that as much as possible, we try to have open source materials when we have a call to action. If you're maybe when you're following your elected official, you also follow MASSCreative, right? Because we are pretty consistently putting out calls to action that you can amplify and share with your communities and with your networks as well.
Thank you. And if you're not following Mass Cultural, but I hope you are because you're here with us today, please follow Mass Cultural at Mass Cultural and sign up to receive our monthly e-newsletters right from the bottom of our website. I think the last question, and this is kind of loaded, which is why I left it for last, but I think that it's on everybody's mind, right? Is really recent, but at the federal level, there are cancellations and defunding and a movement to sort of strip down and the NEA. So is there anything, are there talking points that these folks should have with them? Or is there any messaging on the 19th that's related to what's happening at the federal level? And how is that different from what's happening in Massachusetts? And I
Sure.
can tell you, let me just say this because I don't think you know, because you've been so active, is that while we have been in this meeting together, folks, the Senate Ways and Means budget has come out, and we received the same amount of funding in the Senate budget that we received in the governor and the House's budget. So it's just over 26 million, which is a small increase for Mass Cultural Council, which means we're really holding firm. We're in a really good spot for fiscal 26, which starts July 1. In Massachusetts, the support that the agency and that the sector is receiving for public investment, it is holding very, very strong, and we are very grateful for that.
So just to follow up on what Beth Ann said, that's great. That is, we want to hear that. For context, this is an incredibly difficult budgeting year for Massachusetts. The things that are happening in DC related to elimination of agencies, departments, and programs and grant funding is not exclusive to the arts and cultural sector. It is happening across the boards. It is happening in the education space, in the research and science space, in health and wellness space, right? And so the Massachusetts budget is trying to fill in as much as they possibly can in a year when federal dollars are being removed somewhat arbitrarily. So the fact that there's not just keeping, right, like maintaining the amount of money that the Mass Cultural Council is getting, but providing a slight increase is a signal of success, right? Like, I think oftentimes we're like, what do you mean we didn't get another 2 million? There are budget years that are harder than others, and this is a hard year. So this is a result of consistent and sustained advocacy, which you are all a part of. So kudos to all of us. That is really a relief. So let's talk for a second about what's happening, what just happened since last Friday, right? So I put in the chat a resource page that we have stood up that is directly related to the two issues. One is that in the administration's fiscal year 26 budget, which the president proposes, it sort of starts the budgeting process, just like in Massachusetts when the governor proposes hers. The Trump administration has proposed eliminating the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, Institute for Museum and Library Services, and Corporation for Public Broadcasting. All four of those are part of the creative economy and the creative sector in Massachusetts. The Mass Cultural Council and our regional arts agency, the New England Foundation for the Arts, receive funding through the National Endowment for the Arts. Our Mass Humanities, who is our humanities nonprofit in Massachusetts, receives funding through the National Endowment for the Humanities, and our libraries from IMLS, and our local public radio through Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This will have a real effect. Now, every year in his first term, the Trump administration zeroed out those agencies. And every year, Congress rejected that idea. They, in fact, during his first term, investments, federal funding for the NEA and NEH actually went up. Now, that is a different Congress. That is a different makeup. That was different leadership. And so we are in a real sort of stress mode here, right? Because we don't know if Congress will just take what the president is proposing and pass that, right? So we got to make sure we're advocating, and we're working on that. So number one, we are working on standing up communications and advocacy directly to our members of Congress and your members of Congress that you can share out to talk about this issue with them. And then number two, really specifically, all of our elected officials are in relationship to each other, right? So your house, your state representative talks to the member of Congress where they share a district, right? And so on the 19th, talking to your state rep and your state senator to say, these cuts are going to have an effect on your district direct. And this is something when you talk with Congresswoman Presley, Congressman McGovern, please bring this up as something that's a priority for constituents in both of your districts is a great ask to make. The other thing that happened last week is that the National Endowment for the Arts proceeded to send out letters to direct grantee recipients. So this is a lot of arts nonprofits in Massachusetts, letting them know that their grant had been canceled or withdrawn. In some cases, many of these organizations have already spent money on the grant, on the program that this grant was supposed to pay for, because it works on a reimbursement system, right? So there are arts organizations in your district who have most likely been affected by that. We are working on standing up some resources to collect the data so that we can share with our state reps and our state senators and our governor and our members of Congress just what the impact of these grant cancellations are going to mean. But this is something you can also raise to your state rep and your state senator and say, I understand that the National Endowment for the Arts has canceled grants that arts organizations in Massachusetts are counting on right now. I want you to know this is going to have an effect on the amount of arts and culture that's happening in your district. So one is an ask to say, we want you to make sure to talk to your member of Congress about this. One is an information share, right? And both are really helpful in this moment.
Thank you so much, Emily. I am going to close out the Q&A by answering this very last question. We've had a couple of folks say, okay, great, I'm excited to come on the 19th. What's the timing? What's the run of show? I need to know what time I should try to get into these offices. So thank you so much for that question, the logistical question. You will get a no before you go email a day or two before the 19th from Mass Cultural Council with a lot more sort of logistical information. So do look out for that at whatever email you use to register for the event. But the event on May 19th is taking place at 1 o'clock and it should be over by 3 o'clock. So if you come early, you could do before or you could do in the afternoon, anytime from 3 o'clock on. Those offices are going to be open 9 to 5, just like a normal standard business. And just in case folks haven't been to the State House before, I did want to call out, wherever you're coming from, I would really think about taking public transportation. You can get to the State House from the red line, the orange line, the blue line, the green line. You get off somewhere around the Common, Downtown Crossing, or Government Center, and you walk right up Beacon Hill right to the State House. If you are driving in all the way, you're going to need to find some parking. The State House does not have a parking garage, but there is a pretty large garage underneath the Boston Common. And if you can search around and find some others as well, depending on how far you're willing to walk. There is security at the State House. There are 2 public entrances to the State House. The main one is right on Beacon Street. There is a giant statue of General Thomas Hooker on a horse. You're going to go in right up those steps. You will need to go through security, so you're going to have to go through the metal detector. Depending on the foot traffic, that can take some time, so you want to build that in. There's a second public entrance sort of to the back of the building, the Ashburton Park entrance. Same security is there, so you just want to build that in. And then once you get in, you're going to join us in the Great Hall. The Great Hall is the largest function room in the State House. It is on the 2nd floor. You would take the elevator up to 2 and head towards the noise. That's going to be us. It's going to be really easy to find us. We will make sure to have people around to point you in the right direction, but it is right behind the grand staircase. It's the great big function room with all of the town and city flags hanging in it. And we're really looking forward to celebrating with you on May 19th. So please do come, bring your friends and family, and let's have a great day together. This Spotlight Series session is now at time. So I do want to thank Emily and all that she and her team at MASSCreative does for the creative and cultural sector in Massachusetts, and for joining us today at lunch. Thank you, Emily. That was really helpful. I want to remind you guys that yes, this will be on Mass Cultural's YouTube channel before the end of the week. So you can rewatch this if you want to. And we look really forward to seeing you on the 19th. Thank you all so much for coming, and have a great rest of the day.